Hello, and thank you for tuning in to a new episode of our special research radio program that focuses on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his mission of achieving liberty, equality, and fraternity. I'm Abhishek, and I'm happy to be back from our hiatus with two more episodes. From academic writing to social media, Dr. Ambedkar's scholarship and actions are receiving renewed attention due to the efforts by Dalit Bahujan scholars and thinkers. The podcast you're listening to right now is one specific example of this. And while my guest today has been writing on Dr. Ambedkar for several decades, he's more recently focused on frameworks on how to read Ambedkar. Professor Gopal Guru is currently the editor of EPW and was formerly professor at the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. We'll be discussing several works, including Ethics of Reading Ambedkar's Text and Professor Guru's lecture at the English and Foreign Languages University from 2017. I recommend reading and listening to those two works, and I've shared links to both in the show notes. Thank you for joining us on Research Radio, Professor Guru. A warm welcome to you.
Thanks, Abhishek.
This is a long time coming, and I'm glad we've been able to have this conversation. So in one of your EPW articles, you've written that, quote, accessing Ambedkar's text with the intention to make it part of fashion would suggest both the lack of hermeneutic depth and epistemic commitment to the content of his original texts, end quote. Could you tell us more about this, how to seriously engage with the text rather than to consume it, and the other problems that are involved in approaching Ambedkar's text?
Yeah, let's start with the general problems that are associated with approaching Ambedkar's text. I should also share with you that it is quite encouraging to see that a lot of scholars are now actually approaching Ambedkar's text from all the disciplines: literature, philosophy, theory, history, political science. All that is happening, and they also are from different age groups and gender background. So it is always encouraging. But at the same time, we also have problems with this people approaching Ambedkar's text. What are the problems? The problems are twofold. One is that Ambedkar's text have become an event in the sense that you don't require to read Ambedkar. You don't require to have some kind of homework done before you actually speak about Ambedkar. You are actually like any musical concert manager. You actually manage to organize discussion on Ambedkar's books without actually knowing what is there in the text. And so you are a simple mechanical manager of the text that is being discussed. You don't have to actually make any investment, any kind of epistemic and discursive investment in studying Ambedkar. So this is one big problem. So it becomes event management actually. And so the other problem is that you have a very reading Ambedkar also has become a passion as fashion, not passion. And if it is passion, it's a different thing. But it has become a fashion just because Ambedkar has some kind of a value in the academic and circle. So you keep on working on. I mean, you study Ambedkar's ideas that are actually that have become fashionable in the academic circles or in the political circles. For example, if it is annihilation of caste, you will actually speak about annihilation of caste and actually without actually making any kind of a subsidiary background contextual readings, because Ambedkar text is not actually existing in isolation. It exists only in the presence of other text as well. So you just pick up, singularize the text, and discuss that text. That is just actually very very unfair. You have to have a kind of a ecology of text. You have to actually cover different text in order to make sense of this annihilation of course, for example. That is to say, you have to study Hind Swaraj, you have to study other texts as well. Actually, if you are studying annihilation of caste, you have to study texts that are written by social anthropologists proper. So there's a lot of work which is a contemporary work. This text was written in 1936. There are several texts around that time which also have been written on the same subject. But you just pick up this annihilation of caste and start talking about it. So that is really really unfair. So it becomes a fashion. Whatever is there available as a matter of fashion, you have to simply use your language, your writing skill, and that is good enough for you to go about accessing the text. But that is half the story. The full story, you need to know many texts that are built up around in the same period.
So two things. So one is the fact that some people are not reading, and the other is like having enough context around Ambedkar's text and not doing it only because it's something it's fashionable, and that too as a result of Dalit Bahujan scholars who have made Ambedkar's text a part of curriculums if wherever it is today.
Yeah.
And I think this, leads nicely to the question about social media and knowing, about the role that it may seem a little tangential and out of the flow of our questions, but what role social media could play in taking the reader closer to understanding and maybe interpretations. If you could like enlighten us about that.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, social media plays a very important role in terms of understanding any thinker, including Ambedkar. But social media also has a little problem in the sense that it can actually distribute the text in its fragments, not in its totality, not as a complete text. So you can actually fragment it actually in terms of the captions, in terms of some
Hmm.
quotation, in terms of certain other. I mean, you can just highlight certain points, dot points, or maybe some other points. But that, of course, is not wrong. It is important, but then you should go beyond that. Actually, find out at those points should really provide you as background within which you can develop some kind of intellectual curiosity to go to the original text.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you actually survive only on text. You jump from one. Sorry, you just you survive only on dots, quotations, and
Hmm.
captions,
Hmm.
and then you jump from one caption, one quotation to another quotation, actually without understanding, foregrounding the quotation in the larger philosophical, theoretical, political, cultural, anthropological, aesthetic context of that particular quotation. So I think it becomes a superficial treatment that one can give to a particular text, including Ambedkar's text. So I think this is one problem with the social media. But now there are other attempts in the recent times where you find some certain social media speaking of one theme, and that theme is taken and the discussion is built up around that. So I think if you actually thematize your discussion through social media, that will actually encourage you to go into much deeper discussion that is found in that, not only in that text but other corresponding text as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
social media has a very important role to take people to larger serious discussion
Mhm.
on a particular thing that is available in text. For example, in Ambedkar's text on annihilation of caste, you can find this. Secondly, social media also help you avoiding some kind of a gossip kind of text. No, you can offer some evidence with year of publication, page numbers, sections, and all that.
Mhm.
So it can actually discipline you. So I had mentioned one point in the annihilation of caste talk, and that was about the discursive rationality.
Mhm.
So the discussion rationality will say, look here, you have to cover all the points which are important. They make sense together, not in isolation.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that becomes a possibility when you initiate discussion through social media. So
Mhm.
social media attends to things. One, it takes you to larger context, serious discussion, observation of academic scholarship. Also, it also avoids pitfalls of fiction, gossip, all that. So social media plays a very, very important role, I think. But
Yeah.
it has to be carefully handled by those who are actually handling it. It should not be slogan mongering or slogan shouting or jumping from quotation to another quotation.
Yeah, I think especially the point about seeing it as a part of the larger text would be important, even in the relationship with other texts that you mentioned in the first response of our conversation. And now that we've kind of covered some of the challenges and pitfalls that we should avoid while reading Annihilation of Caste, I was interested in this one quote that I found quite powerful in the article, where you've said that the very act of reading has a civilizing impact on a reader. So if we can, unpack this quote, and particularly, what makes it relevant when we talk about annihilation of caste.
So I think there are two ways of reading the text,
Hmm.
and particularly texts written by all those people who have suffered historical injustices like Jyotirao Phule or Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar or some black thinkers in the US. So when you are actually studying them, you cannot study them with a very dry understanding, a dry approach that is devoid of emotions, that is devoid of ethics. So you have to actually enter the text with a lot of ethical baggage, ethical pressure, that you are not going to actually use it for consumption, purely intellectual consumption. You are actually going to learn something from it, not for your personal uh, aggrandizement, but actually enlarging your mentality to see the problems that are actually discussed in that particular text. So you actually establish some kind of a relationship with the problems that are there in the text, and problems that continue to exist outside the text.
Hmm.
So that mediation has to take place through your reading. You are reading plus writing. You can't be a dispassionate writer as far as these texts are concerned. These texts by Dr. Ambedkar are concerned, because entering the text is a risky job. As I mentioned in one of the articles in email, that it's like, enter the you should be ready to actually suffer some kind of moral injuries, because it will hit you. The
Hmm.
text, which is written in a very straightforward, very intimate fashion, is likely to make you uncomfortable. It can morally hit you, so you have to be ready to take that blow, moral, ethical blow, while you are actually reading the text. So it's not simply uh, uh, some kind of engaging. It's not like a horror story. It's not like a fiction novel. It's something which will actually trouble you, disturb you morally. You will have to stop and then read. You just can't. It's not engrossing. It's not that kind of a reading that you have. It's not a linear reading of a particular text. You have to think about it, stop about it. That's why reading is always risky. It will always take you at the crossroad. It will always disturb your settled thinking. uh,
Hmm.
these are these texts are they have this ethical function to perform. So in that sense, you can say that texts by Bhimrao Ambedkar or Jyotirao Phule or other feminist writers have a civilizing impact, that it actually works as if it is like a very strong chemicals which works on your very rigid
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
attitude or perspective. You become vulnerable to pressures, methodical
Hmm.
pressure of this, and you will begin to change yourself in the light of emancipatory mode that is followed by the text.
Hmm. Hmm. And that's quite a powerful impact that a text can have. And I think maybe that's also one of the reasons why it attracts annihilation of caste attracts people from different disciplines. So I think leads well to a certain extent to some of the questions that you pose on the process of writing about how to read annihilation of caste in your based on your talk at the University of Foreign Languages, Foreign and English Languages, IFLU. And I just wanted to, quickly summarize them. And then if, you could take us deeper into one or two that you feel are quite, close to your heart.
Please
One,
go
the
ahead.
first, yes. So the first one is, you question if Annihilation of Caste is a pragmatic text, which is, offering policy alternatives to the government of India to annihilate caste. Is it something that today the Niti Aayog would read and consider? Second, is it a text that is full of complaints about the victimhood that Dalits experience? Third, you question if it's a polemical text that inevitably gives equal advantage to the adversary. Fourth, you is the question about leadership. So, following Ambedkar, you contend that, quote, however Maha the Pandit, like, Maha as in great the Pandit is, however big and erudite the Pandit is from an untouchable caste, he can never be accepted by the Brahmins as their leader, end quote. So if you can, maybe one or two of these that you feel are, the most important to unpack.
Yeah, I think the first point that we have to see is this: annihilation of caste is not about annihilation. That is to say that there is some kind of a disease. Of
Hmm.
course, casteism is a disease, and there is actually, and it is visible, and you can always go and uh, treat that disease and this and then and eliminate the problem. So the caste practices are not like they are there, existing there as a visible problem. They are actually permeated in the society through different cultural, psychological, moral, political, philosophical processes. So Dr. Ambedkar actually is hinting at that, and he is not only talking about problems that have deeper permeation in these processes, but it also has sometimes a corresponding impact, corresponding relationship with other social problems existing elsewhere in the world, like black problem. So that is one very substantive dimension of the annihilation of caste. The other dimension of this annihilation of caste is talks about principles. It talks about values. For example, it talks about equality. But when it approaches equality, it doesn't actually start from the top, as they say in tautological understanding of any concept or any principle. Like you start with equality, you start with friendship, start with justice. Ambedkar doesn't start with that. He starts with the notion of inequality. That's why there is a graded inequality. That is the word that he is using in
Hmm.
that particular text. So you actually open up into the discussion or into the problematic, not through the positive language as equality, but through the not through the affirmative language of equality, justice, of other things, but necessarily through the negative language like
Hmm.
inequality. So that people so how to read, and there is some kind of a protocol of reading a particular text. So you can do justice to reading a text. So you just don't start mechanically or superficially from, oh, there is some kind of discussion on equality or justice, and you start. No, that would be misreading of the text.
Hmm.
He necessarily starts with a negative language. Why negative language? Because his experience has been injustice, not injustice. His experience has been inequality. In his own life, you find that he was actually confronted with injustices, not with equality. Inequality is the front of the problem, while equality and justice remain into the background. They are not absent, but they are in the background.
Hmm.
So when you are invoking, you invoke injustice only, and not justice. So injustice is done to me. That's why the text. Annihilation of caste is actually annihilation of caste is the ultimate expression. What is important in the annihilation of caste is that inequality, in discrimination, injustice. These are the frontal concepts which are not actually properly theorized by people, but they are there waiting for their theoretical attention in the text called Annihilation of Caste. But scholars actually miss that, and they actually take it to a polemical level, what Gandhi has said and what Ambedkar has said. So that is actually grossly unfair to read the text.
Hmm.
So you actually have, there is a framework, there's a framework, there's a protocol framework within which you have to approach the problem. The framework is that you necessarily start with the negative, not the tautological, the affirmative. But people miss it because that won't. It requires some kind of a patience, some kind of a readiness to
Hmm.
understand and perhaps interpret. But that doesn't happen.
Hmm. Hmm. And when we were discussing the parts about morality, you've also compared these two different kinds of morality. So the emancipatory practice by Dr. Ambedkar, and the thug morality that's produced by the caste structure. So if we can walk us through both these kinds of morality and the importance.
So I know there are two problems. When you can always apply a formal logic to understand the text. What is formal logic? The formal logic is that you actually don't have to make any reference to the experience or social reality within which the text has been formulated. The formative grounds of the text is the empirical reality that existed historically over a period of time. And Ambedkar's text and the Jyotirao Phule's text actually happen in the very concrete historical context.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't do that. They actually connect these texts with another text. And I take one concept, for example, and you connect it with another concept. So then they bring in very uncomfortable comparisons like between Ambedkar and Foucault and Ambedkar and Agamben, Ambedkar and blah blah blah. So, but that is formal logic. That doesn't really understand the syntax and the thrust of the text. The text evolves with its own logic, which actually is a very dialectical logic, which actually grows in tension with the reality or in conformity with the reality. It
Hmm.
actually, caste, for example, the annihilation of caste actually is not developing as outside the caste reality, the caste experience. Actually, it's developing with the concrete, historically given realities such as caste discrimination and touchability. But people don't carry that burden.
Hmm. Hmm.
To that extent, you can say there's a thuggery involved in this.
Hmm.
To some extent, it's a very hard word, but but you can say there's a unfair, there's an easy route that they have selected to really approach, because connecting it is to really familiarize yourself with the reality.
Hmm.
And so, even I'm not saying that those people who are born in lower caste have better understanding or advantage to do it. They sometimes also forget to connect it. They also are fascinated by actually jumping from one concept to another concept. So that would be incorrect reading of the text.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think the aspect about the empirical reality and the relationship, because if this is being taught in a classroom environment, the fact that the basis of of caste discrimination and untouchability is prevalent within and outside of it as well.
Yeah, so Abhishek, I should also add, if it is a classroom situation, if the
Yeah.
teacher, if the teacher is teaching annihilation of caste and he or she is not aware about the empirical reality, then that person will build up argument only within a very discursive sphere of connecting one concept with another concept, actually, for equality, for example. He or she will not start with inequality, will necessarily start with equality of Plato, Aristotle, and others. So I think you don't have to, and people, the students who are sitting in the classroom will also love it, because that's a fascinating exercise that is happening, because no one is actually investing any kind of moral capital
Hmm.
in reading the text. They're all free from this moral burden of really knowing the reality of gender, caste, all that. So that is happening. If at all they are teaching annihilation of caste, some of them are do teach, but if at all they are teaching annihilation of caste, that is a real serious pedagogical problem with teaching annihilation of caste.
Yeah, I think this also relates to the fact of reading, and as has a civilizing impact that we discussed earlier in the conversation.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, continuing this thread of line, you've written about the belief that upper castes increase the value of Dr. Ambedkar's text and Dalits are the reason for its devaluation. You've written that, quote, from this point of view, one may compare Dalits with the touch me not plant,
Yeah.
which has a constricting power to shrink its leaves the moment they are touched.
Yeah.
The moment Dalits would touch the text, it will shrink in terms of its universal essence, end quote. So if you can tell me about where this metaphor came from and the implications for universality and emancipation.
What has happened over a period of time, globally and locally, that you require a particular darling author to actually write about Ambedkar, take Ambedkar's writings to the people, and people also actually trust that particular author. For example, in the West, you find that those who are working on Ambedkar do not actually quote scholars in India. Their scholars, their reference point is only those scholars who are the non-Indian residents, NRIs. And so, but they would be coming here, collecting data and all that. So, what does it mean? How do we understand this? This is the ethical problem. Is our study of Ambedkar inferior? Is it inadequate? Is it not fitting to the
Hmm.
protocols of disposition, theory, and hypothesis? Why? What is the ground on which they actually avoid your quotations and they
Hmm.
put
Hmm.
people from the same background, same? So that as that I mean, I don't know how to understand this, but this is what is happening in the field of scholarship. So you are actually not you are not interested in actually expanding the contours of the debate, but you are actually in a way fashioning out certain material which is palatable to the academic taste of the people. Yeah, this is a very unfortunate development that has taken place in the field of scholarship and imagination about Ambedkar, particularly.
Mm. And as we approach, the last two questions, I think I wanted to change gears and know about the relationship. Someone we've been referencing throughout this conversation that you've been referencing, Jyotirao Phule and Dr. Ambedkar. If we can, explore some of the areas of similarities and differences in thought and action. I mean, I know that this can be an entire podcast or a book in itself, but a few would be great.
Ambedkar himself has actually accepted three gurus, and this is the oft repeated point. One is Buddha, the other one is Kabir, the other one is Jyotirao Phule.
Mm.
Now, so since they are gurus of Ambedkar, Ambedkar is our guru, for example, because they form into a particular critical tradition of understanding and transformation and emancipation. So, their emancipatory thought overlaps in different degrees, but it does overlap. Okay, and so an Ambedkar actually is actually appropriating critically the emancipatory impulses that are available in the philosophy, politics of these three great people, uh, Bud- Buddha, Kabir, and Phule. Now, so this tradition, as they call, and I won't call it a Bhujan tradition, I will call it a Shudra, Ati Shudra tradition. This is
Mhm.
Jyotirao Phule's terminology.
Mhm.
Or you can call it Buddhist tradition. But
Mhm.
Buddhism, Bhujan actually originates in Buddhism. So it's not a separate, people don't really refer to this anyway. It has become such an easy category available. It is a fashion category actually. Yeah,
Mhm.
yes. Thanks to the electoral politics which has made it fashionable, uprooting it from its own philosophical contours, anchorages. So the critical tradition of the Shudra, Ati Shudra, or the Buddhist tradition is a tradition of association.
Mhm.
It is actually associated in terms of its commitment to the emancipation. So ideas evolve in terms of this commitment, not in isolation with this commitment. So
Mhm.
that is the
Mhm.
great contribution. So we have to think about this tradition not in isolation but in association in terms of the intellectual overlap, in terms of the normative overlap, and
Mhm.
there is a common agenda to take to change the society
Mhm.
which is egalitarian in a very radical sense, not in a libertarian sense, liberal sense. Yeah.
And just a last question, if we can. So, suppose I just got a book, "The Annihilation of Caste," in my hands, and what is some of the suggestions that you have, maybe a few, two or three, that I should keep in mind when I'm starting on the first page of the book.
So you have to first of all you have to ask the question yourself. Why do you want to read this book?
Mm-hmm.
That is the first question that you have to ask. Do you want to read it just because it's a time pass? Do you want to read it just because there's a lot of polemics involved in this, which is not there? Why do you want to read this book? Is there a purpose? I think no, you have to actually foreground yourself into this causal relationship. Why do you want to read this text?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start reading the text. It's a curiosity question that you should start that you don't know much about caste, its philosophical, theoretical, political, cultural dimension. You are deficient, and therefore you want to approach this text. Maybe you have read other texts on caste, but you are not satisfied with them.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make a complete argument by reading this. So that kind of self limitation should be the starting point when you actually approach this text.
Mm-hmm.
So, but does it happen is the question, and then you must have a rich understanding of the problem of caste. Now, not simply caste as a practical problem that has to be eliminated with certain 25 program or some policy intervention and initiatives. You have to actually first of all understand what is the text about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these three questions you must always have. You must have some kind of curiosity, you must have some kind of anxiety to know more about caste. And that is what is the annihilation of caste is an invitation to take you into deeper questions of caste.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I think that was a really illuminating conversation and really fits perfectly with the thread of our series so far.
Thanks, Abhishek, for this conversation. Yeah, thank you.
I hope you liked that conversation with Professor Gopal Guru. This is the 7th episode of our special program that explores the multiple dimensions of Dr. Ambedkar's thought and practice. Do have a look at our previous episodes if you haven't already. We'll be back with our last episode in 1 week. Take care, and I hope you tune in wherever you listen to podcasts.